everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing the top nonfiction reads that you have to check out. Even if nonfiction's not your sort of thing, it wasn't mine either until I read some of these books, and that for sure changed my perception on nonfiction. So stick around, and I hope you enjoy this video. Before we start today's video off with our first book, I want to talk about how I've sort of organized this list. So I have three main categories for the books that I'm going to be talking about today. The first is more of like an academic slash history sort of genre. So these are books that are either based on people in history or are more scientific or academic. So a lot of these books on that sort of list will be books that I, have read for school and really enjoyed and thought they were worth mentioning. So that's what our first category is that we're going to be talking about today. The second one I have under a category titled Important Topics, which are all books that I think touch on really important issues in today's world, such as racism, sexism, homophobia, things like that. So the second section of this video is going to be nonfiction reads that I think everyone should check out if you're interested in learning more about those topics. The third section in this video is going to be biographies and autobiographies that I've read and loved. So these will include a lot of people's stories. Some may be right up your alley, some may not, and that's okay. I just thought I'd give you guys the widest range of books possible in order to try and seek out your interests, and hopefully there's something on this list that you can find interesting as well. So those are the three sort of categories that I'm going to be touching on today. So I thought we'd start right off into our academic slash history topic with The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This book was a required reading book for our high school biology class, my freshman year of high school, and it has just stuck with me throughout the years. I think that this story is so incredible, and it's not something anybody had ever heard of until this book really called attention to it. So this book was published a few years ago, and it's since then had a movie that's been really popular, and so I'm sure that some of you have probably heard of this book, or at least of the topic that this book is about. This book is about a tobacco farmer named Henrietta Lacks in the 1950s. Now, this was a real woman who went in for a procedure at the hospital, and her cells were taken from her without her consent, and they were then used to create the vaccine for polio, gene mapping, all of these things. Her cells are still around today, living, although she has since passed, and all of this was done without her consent or without her family's knowledge. And the reason why I find this book so incredible is because it touches on how huge the medical industry is, and how a lot of times people like Henrietta get overlooked and completely ignored, to be blatantly honest. Henrietta Lacks was a black woman who did not have a lot of money in the 1950s and was never compensated for the millions and millions of dollars that were spent buying and selling her cells. They were part of her body at one point, and her family had no idea that this sort of $1 million industry had started because of Henrietta. And so this book really goes into depth about her ancestors and her family, sort of trying to draw attention to just how necessary Henrietta's cells were to a lot of the modern medicine that we have today. This book touches on topics such as race as well as family dynamics, which are really, really cool to read about, especially because the author of this book, Rebecca Skloot, interviewed a lot of her ancestors who are still living today and still fighting for justice for Henrietta. So please check out this book if you have the time. The next book on this list is The Family Romanov, Murder, Rebellion, and the Fall of Imperial Russia by Candace Flemings. So that title might be a little jarring. You're like, why, Stella, are you telling me to read this book that has a very long title and is about Imperial Russia? Well, I'll tell you why. Raise your hand if you had a crush on Dmitri from Anastasia when you were younger. Okay, that's besides the point. This book sort of tells the story of the Romanovs, which were the family sort of ruling Imperial Russia back in the 1800s. It's really, really interesting. It just goes into depth about all of this sort of, you know, as there was poverty and just absolute devastation throughout their land, what these people did and how they handled that situation of their people literally dying on the streets. Surprise, they did not handle it that well. But this book was so interesting because it really went into the family dynamics and sort of the dark secrets of this giant, you know, influential family. And I'm sure many of you have seen the animated movie Anastasia. Well, a lot of people don't know, but that was actually based on a real story about Anastasia Romanov, and there was rumors back in the 1800s that she was the only surviving member of the Romanov family, as the rest of her family members were killed. So this book, honestly, was just so interesting to me because I'm someone who, like, I don't like reading history textbooks. I think they're so boring. But this book in particular really, I think, caught my interest because of the downfall of this family and how their sort of rule over Imperial Russia like came to an end. And I think it was really, really interesting to read about and really interesting to learn about all of the aspects of the family and their really close family friends is a loose word, we'll say that. But anyway, I think that if you're really into sort of mystery and drama of like the 1800s, Russian or not, check it out. It's a pretty interesting read for sure. The final book in academic and history section of this video is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Now, this was another book that I had to read for school, and guess what? Surprise, surprise, I loved it. I'm just thinking that if any of my friends from school see this, they're gonna be like, Stella, we all did not want to read these books, but you read them and loved them. What is wrong with you? So Outliers was definitely a different type of a nonfiction book that I'd never read before. Malcolm Gladwell is pretty well known. He's, he is a very, very, very smart man. His books are very intellectual, and definitely some people won't like them, some people will. One of the most memorable chapters of this book, I remember, was actually when Malcolm Gladwell was talking about hockey and how lots of times in especially hockey, along with a lot of other sports, children who are born earlier in the year tend to do better than children who were born in the later half of the year. And he just talks about how there's little things that you never really notice or control that end up impacting your entire life. In addition, this is where the saying, it takes 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert at something, there's some quote like that, but that's where it came from. It was this book. So in this book, Malcolm Gladwell basically examines factors that are in our world that contribute to high levels of success. So this book talks a lot about what contributes to success and how successful people come to be. So it's really, really interesting book. It's obviously not a blueprint for how to be successful, or, you know, like, that's definitely not what this book is, but it's so interesting to read about all these little things that you would never think about really contributing to people's success. So if this sounds like something that you'd be interested in checking out, I've left a link in the description to all of the books mentioned in this video, but especially this one, go check it out. Moving on to the next section of this video, important topics. So the first book I'm going to recommend for this section is the book All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. Now, this book was a really, really heart-wrenching read. Definitely check out the trigger warnings before reading this, just because it's a pretty heavy book. But I thought that the way this story was told was just done beautifully. I truly cannot say enough good things about this book. The way it was written was just so touching. And especially if you're someone who struggled with either gender identity or sexuality, I think this book really took a lot of courage to write. And I give major props to George M. Johnson for telling his story, because it's a really difficult one to tell. But I think it's so important, and we need more stories like this to be shared. So definitely check it out if you're able to. So this book sort of tells his story about struggling with sexuality as well as being a young Black person, and it truly was just told in a way that really I think could resonate with a lot of people. So please give this book a go if this is something you'd be interested in. It's a really, really great read, and I recommend it to everyone. The next book in this section of the video isn't really a book. Instead, it's actually an essay, and this is an essay on feminism, which is one of the most incredible pieces that I've ever read on feminism. It truly just, it's amazing. This piece is called There Is No Unmarked Woman by Deborah Tannen Sum, and it is an incredible essay talking about how there is no such thing as an unmarked woman. So in this essay, the author talks a lot about how there's such a thing as marked and unmarked in our society, and how words, styles, and titles affect females' ability to choose an unmarked position in life. So for example, if we think about how men and women, when they're either married or not married, their titles that are put before their first names, women have 3 different versions that they could really go by. We have Miss for a woman who's single, we have Mrs. for a woman who's married, and Ms. for a woman who is choosing not to specify. Whereas men are always just titled Mr. And so this sort of discussion throughout the whole essay, it goes beyond just this one example, but this idea of being marked and unmarked really contributes to women and how they're affected in daily life, whether it be at work, at home, wherever. This essay just does a really beautiful job of sort of exploring things that I think a lot of people never really think about. So definitely give it a read if you're someone who's looking to learn a little bit more about feminism. This brings us to our final section of this video, autobiographies, and I have some really, really incredible books on this list. I'm someone who loves reading biographies, even from people that I've never heard of before. I just think it's so interesting to read how people have written their own lives. And so the first book I'm going to talk about on this list is Becoming by Michelle Obama. This book is no surprise. It is an extremely well-known book by Michelle Obama. It's an incredible read. I actually listened to the audiobook of it, which was really cool because Michelle Obama herself narrates it. Regardless of your position in politics, I think that this is a really, really cool read to check out because it tells this Michelle Obama story, which is so incredible and so uplifting, and it truly just sort of shows that anybody from anywhere can make it to the top. And I just think that's such a cool message. And so definitely check it out if you have time. The next book on this list is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This book was the first autobiography that I ever read, and it is by far my favorite that I've ever read as well. It is such a heart-wrenching story and truly just made me reflect on how lucky I am. This story, it follows Yeonmi Park and her journey in escaping from North Korea as a young teenager and how that sort of has impacted her life. In addition to the link to this book, I am going to leave a link to her TED Talk as well. Now, Yeonmi Park is doing really well. She has a family. She's really cool. She's a really awesome woman. She still advocates for the people who are still stuck in North Korea looking to get out. I truly don't feel like I can serve this book justice just talking about it. I truly think that it's something that you just have to sort of read for yourself. Before you do read it, make sure that you read up on some of the trigger warnings because some of her experiences were really horrific and really hard to read about, so make sure you go and make sure that that's something that you can handle before reading this book, but please give it a read. Everyone should read this book. The next book on this list is My Forbidden Face. Now, this was a book that, again, we had to read for school, and I really, really enjoyed this book, if you couldn't tell. This is a story about a young woman and how she survived life under Taliban rule as a teenager. Latifah talks throughout this book about how her life just changed in an instant, and it truly made me reflect on my own life and how lucky that I am. But in addition to that, it also is a very uplifting story about her escaping, and I believe she's stationed in France now, but she really did a great job of just giving us a window into the life of a young woman living under the Taliban, and I know that that's something that's really prevalent right now, and it's definitely a conversation that we need to be talking about more, and this book did an incredible job of discussing it, so please read this book. The next book on this list is An Actor's Life by Jenna Fischer. This book is a little different from books that I usually pick up. This was a autobiography written by the actress Jenna Fischer, who I adore. I'm a big fan of The Office, and she was the lead actress in The Office. As someone who's an aspiring actress, I decided that, you know, it might be kind of cool to like pick up a book by an actress that I've really admired. And so I just decided to give this one a go. And I adored this book. Jenna Fischer just is so funny. Literally, she could be talking about the most blatantly boring thing on the planet, and I would just like love to sit there and listen to her for as long as she wanted to talk. She is hilarious. She really talks about, you know, the struggles of being an actress trying to, you know, make it big in Hollywood. And I think that if you're also someone who's looking for acting advice, or if you're someone who has been struggling to, you know, make it in the industry, definitely check out this book. It's incredible. She has some really funny stories. And this book was definitely good to sort of get me out of a funk. I had been going on a lot of auditions and not really getting anything, but after reading this book, I sort of was able to look at it from a bigger perspective and realize that, you know, getting a no wasn't such a bad thing. So definitely, if you're someone who's really, you know, into acting, or if you're someone who's just looking for an uplifting story, honestly, check out Jenna's book. It's really, really cool, and just such a fun read too. The final book on this list is a hefty one, and this is Humans by Brandon Stanton. Now, this series is actually not technically a book. It is a photo essay of people from all over the world. Originally, Brandon Stanton was writing on a blog called Humans of New York. So he went to New York and would stop people on the streets, just asking them questions, interviewing them about their lives, and eventually he sort of blew up. Like, this blog really gained a lot of attention. And so he does have two other collections called Humans of New York and then Stories, where he goes more into depth about people's lives that he meets on the streets. And this book is where he got to travel the world, asking people of all different from all different countries, of all different ethnicities and cultures, to discuss with him their stories. It truly is such a cool series. I've been following this series since I was maybe 10. And I really, really enjoyed it. Again, if you're looking for something too that isn't like such a big read, you know, this has a ton of pictures of these people that he met along the way. Some captions are nice and short, some are longer. I truly recommend checking this one out if you're interested in just sort of branching out and reading about people's lives. I thought it was really cool and really insightful, and it made me think of, like, if I got stopped on the street, what would I say if someone asked me, like, what I did or, like, what my life was like. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. Sorry this video was a little, like, all over the place. Let me know what you would like to see from me further in the future, and thank you so much for sticking with me throughout this video. I hope you found some good recommendations that you're interested in checking out. If not, sorry. Maybe I'll do part 2 sometime. I hope you find something that you like. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.
Hold up, baby, I can't sit beside you while you're going on about your simple life. Nothing left you thinking that maybe you're not different.